It all started on a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where you just want to enjoy your coffee and maybe take your car out for a spin. I had just bought my dream ride, a sleek black Rolls Royce, polished so bright you could practically see your future in it. I knew it might turn a few heads in the neighborhood, but I wasn't expecting a full-blown scene. Little did I know, my HOA's most notorious enforcer, the one everyone calls Karen, was already watching from her window. Eyes locked on my driveway like a hawk spotting prey. I had barely stepped out to admire the car when she came, marching over. You know the type: sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, that tight smile that says, "I'm about to ruin your day." Without even a hello, she started going on about community standards and the kind of image we want to maintain around here. I tried to explain that the Rolls was parked neatly, that it wasn't breaking any rules, but she wasn't having it. Her voice got sharper, and before I knew it, she was pulling out her phone and making calls. Not the friendly kind. Then things got weird. She leaned in, lowered her voice, and said something I didn't expect at all. "I can make this all go away. No fines, no trouble, if you sell it to me." At first, I thought she was joking, but she wasn't smiling. She actually named a price way below what the car was worth. I laughed, thinking this was some kind of prank. That's when her tone changed completely. She said she could handle this another way and hinted she had friends who could make life difficult if I didn't take her offer. The next thing I knew, her handling it turned into something I never imagined. And that's when I realized this was going way beyond a simple HOA complaint. But here's where it gets interesting. Because what happened next left me standing in my own driveway, completely stunned, wondering how far she was willing to go. She didn't wait for me to answer. Karen pulled out a little leather-bound notebook and started scribbling something down like she was logging evidence for a court case. Every few seconds, she'd glance up at me with that look. The kind you're not sure if the person is planning a meeting or a full-scale takedown. The air felt heavier, like the whole street was watching, even though no one else was outside. My Rolls Royce just sat there, gleaming in the sun. But it suddenly felt like a magnet for trouble, instead of the dream I'd worked so hard for. The thing is, this wasn't my first strange run-in with her. A few weeks back, she had stopped me over something ridiculous, a too bright porch light. Another time, it was a warning about non-standard flower pots. Everyone in the neighborhood had their own Karen story, but mine seemed to be escalating faster than anyone else's. And now, here she was, practically whispering in my ear about how these kinds of cars attract the wrong attention and how she could keep the peace if I just let it go for her price. I tried to keep my voice calm, telling her the car wasn't going anywhere. That's when she snapped her notebook shut and said something that made my stomach drop. "Fine, you'll be hearing from someone else then." I wanted to laugh it off, but the way she said it didn't sound like an idle threat. She walked back toward her house without looking over her shoulder, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. Later that day, I started noticing little things. My mailbox door left open, a black SUV idling a few houses down. Even my security camera picked up someone walking past my driveway late at night, slowing down to look at the Rolls. None of it was proof, but it all felt connected. By the time Sunday rolled around, I wasn't just worried about the HOA. I was wondering what kind of friends Karen had been talking about, and whether I had just stepped into something way bigger than a neighborhood dispute. On Monday morning, I woke up to a sharp knock on my door. Not the friendly kind, more like the open up now kind. When I checked the peephole, it wasn't Karen. It was a man in a gray suit I'd never seen before. He didn't smile, didn't even introduce himself, just handed me an envelope and said, "Consider your options." Inside was a printed notice from the HOA, claiming my Rolls Royce was causing disturbances and negatively impacting property values. The strangest part, It was signed by Karen, but also stamped with something that looked way more official than HOA paperwork ever needed. I couldn't help but think about her friends. Were they just other HOA board members, or was there something bigger at play? The more I thought about it, the more I noticed how quiet the neighborhood felt. People I usually waved to suddenly avoided eye contact. Even my next-door neighbor, who loved cars as much as I did, seemed nervous when I brought up the Rolls. He just muttered, "Be careful, man," and shut his door to distract myself. I decided to drive out of town for a few hours. But halfway down the road, I noticed a car in my rearview mirror, the same black SUV I'd seen parked near my street. Every time I changed lanes, it did too. I took a few random turns, and it stayed right there. Eventually, it peeled off, but by then, my hands were gripping the wheel like I was in some kind of chase scene. That night, I reviewed the footage from my security cameras again. This time, I saw something I hadn't caught before: Karen herself. Walking past my driveway after dark, pausing to run her hand along the hood of the Rolls, almost like she was claiming it. She looked around, then said something into her phone before disappearing into the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no longer about a car. It was about control. And if I didn't figure out what she really wanted, and who else was involved, the Rolls Royce might not be the only thing I stood to lose. By Thursday, the pressure was unbearable. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. The black SUV was back, parked just far enough down the street to look like it belonged, but it never left until I did. My phone started getting strange calls from blocked numbers, each one hanging up the moment I answered. The HOA notice was still sitting on my kitchen table, and I kept reading it over, trying to figure out how a car could possibly disturb community harmony unless someone was twisting the rules to make it happen. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I heard voices outside my window. I peeked through the blinds and saw Karen standing with two men I didn't recognize. They weren't dressed like neighbors, more like they'd just stepped out of some security detail. One of them had a tablet, and I swear I saw pictures of my house on the screen. Karen pointed toward my driveway, speaking quickly, her arms cutting through the air in sharp motions. It wasn't a friendly conversation. I thought about confronting her right there, but something told me not to. Instead, I decided to test something. I grabbed my car keys and hit the unlock button, letting the Rolls Royce's lights flash across the street. Karen's head snapped toward my house instantly, and the two men exchanged a glance before starting toward my driveway. I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. A few minutes later, there was another knock at my door, slower this time, but heavier, deliberate. I didn't answer. Then I heard Karen's voice through the door, calm, but with an edge that made my skin crawl. "You're running out of time. Make the right choice." When I checked the driveway after they left, I noticed something new. A thin envelope was tucked under my windshield wiper. I pulled it out with shaky hands and opened it. Inside was a single photo. The Rolls Royce parked in my driveway, but this time, in the background, you could see me standing in my living room window. Someone had taken it from outside my house. My hands went cold as I stared at the photo. The message wasn't written in words, but it was loud and clear. They were watching me inside my own home. I checked the timestamp printed in tiny numbers at the bottom. It was taken the night before, around the same time I'd seen Karen, near my driveway. But here's the part that made my stomach knot. The angle of the shot wasn't from the street. It was from my backyard. I rushed to check the security footage, scrolling to the exact time, but the feed was blank. Not frozen, completely wiped. Every other part of the night was there, except for a 20-minute gap right when the photo was taken. Someone had been close enough to touch the car, and my cameras never caught them. As I stood there trying to process it, I got a text from an unknown number. It was short: "Meet tonight, midnight, alone." No name, no location. Just a pin dropped on a map, a spot right outside the neighborhood, near an old, half-empty shopping plaza. I told myself it could be a trap, but another part of me knew I had to go. If I didn't figure out what was going on, the Rolls Royce might end up gone. Or worse, I'd be the one forced out of my own house. All evening, I paced the floor, replaying everything in my head: the black SUV, the erased footage, Karen's threats. When midnight came, I drove to the plaza, my headlights sweeping across cracked pavement and empty storefronts. The air was thick and still, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every sound. Then, out of the shadows, someone stepped forward. Not Karen, not the suited men. It was my neighbor. The same one who had warned me to be careful. He looked around nervously before speaking. "You have no idea what you're mixed up in," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just about the car. It's about what's inside it." Before I could ask what he meant, a set of headlights lit up the parking lot, and they were coming straight for us. The SUV screeched to a stop, its headlights flooding the cracked pavement with